The murder of Mary Nichols occurred in the early hours of the morning of Friday, August the 31st, 1888, and when her inquest opened on the afternoon of Saturday the 1st of September, one of the police officers who is detailed in the newspapers as watching the case on behalf of the Criminal Investigation Department was Inspector Frederick George Abberline.
Abberline, an officer of considerable experience, was the lead detective in the on-the-ground investigation into the case.
A week later, on Saturday the 8th of September, the body of Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of number 29 Hanbury Street in Spitalfields, and police efforts to apprehend the perpetrator intensified, despite the fact that the newly appointed head of the Criminal Investigation Department, Robert Anderson, had gone on a recuperative break. Sir Charles Warren, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, who himself had been on leave when the murder of Mary Nichols occurred and who had returned to duty on the 7th of September, began grappling with the conundrum of bringing the person responsible for the atrocities to justice. He felt that the best way forward was to give one man responsibility for assessing every piece of information relating to the case. To that end, on the 15th of September, Warren issued instructions that Chief Inspector Donald Sutherland Swanson was to be put in overall charge of the investigation, and every paper, every document, every report, every telegram was to pass through his hands. Swanson's role meant that he was up to speed on almost every strand and line of inquiry that the police were following, and he therefore built up an unrivalled knowledge of the investigation, being, to quote Warren, the eyes and ears of the Commissioner in this particular case. The inquest into the death of Annie Chapman resumed on the 19th of September, and prior to attending, Abberline sat down to pen a report on the murders, which he duly forwarded to Chief Inspector Swanson. This report is of interest because it gives us an insight into what the police knew, some might say didn't know, up to that point about various witnesses and about the events surrounding the murders of Mary Nichols and Annie Chapman. He also makes mention of the Leather Apron scare, which had kept newspaper readers gripped since the Star newspaper had broken the story in early September. Taking up his pen, Abberline wrote,
Metropolitan Police Criminal Investigation Department, Scotland Yard, 19th day of September, 1888. Subject: Re-murder in Whitechapel. With reference to the subject named in margin, I beg to report that about 3:40 a.m. 31st Alt, as Charles Cross, carman of 22 Doveton Street, Cambridge Road, Bethnal Green, was passing through Bucks Row, Whitechapel, on his way to work, he noticed a woman lying on her back on the footway against some gates leading into a stable yard. He stopped to look at the woman when another carman, also on his way to work, named Robert Paul of 30 Foster Street, Bethnal Green, came up, and Cross called his attention to the woman. But being dark, they did not notice any blood, and passed on with the intention of informing the first constable they met, and on arriving at the corner of Hanbury Street and Old Montague Street, they met PC 55H Misen, and acquainted him of what they had seen. And on the constable proceeding towards the spot, he found PC 97J Neal, who was on the beat, had found the woman and was calling for assistance. PC Neal had turned on his light and discovered that the woman's throat was severely cut. PC 96J Thane was also called and sent at once for Dr. Llewellyn of 152 Whitechapel Road, who quickly arrived on the scene and pronounced life extinct and ordered the removal of the body to the mortuary. In the meantime, PC Misen had been sent for the ambulance and assistance from Bethnal Green Station, and on Inspector Spratling and other officers arriving, the body was removed to the mortuary. On arriving there, the inspector made a further examination and found that the abdomen had also been severely cut in several places, exposing the intestines. The inspector acquainted Dr. Llewellyn, who afterwards made a more minute examination and found that the wounds in the abdomen were in themselves sufficient to cause instant death, and he expressed an opinion that they were inflicted before the throat was cut. The body was not then identified. On the clothing being carefully examined by Inspector Helson, he found some of the underclothing bore the mark of Lambeth Workhouse, which led to the body being identified as that of a former inmate named Mary Ann Nichols, and by that means we were able to trace the relatives and complete the identity. It was found that she was the wife of William Nichols of 37 Coburg Street, Old Kent Road, a printer in the employ of Messrs. Perkins, Bacon & Co., Whitefriars Street, City, from whom she had been separated about 9 years through her drunken and immoral habits, and for several years past she had from time to time been an inmate of various workhouses. In May of this year, she left Lambeth Workhouse and entered the service of Mr. Cowdrey, Ingleside, Rosehill Road, Wandsworth. She remained there until the 12th of July, when she absconded, stealing various articles of wearing apparel. A day or two after, she became a lodger at 18 Thrall Street, Spitalfields, and slept there and at another common lodging house, 56 Flower and Dean Street, up to the night of the murder. About 1:40 a.m. that morning, she was seen in the kitchen at 18 Thrall Street, when she informed the deputy at the lodging house that she had no money to pay her lodgings. She requested that a bed might be kept for her, and left, stating that she would soon get the money. At this time she was drunk. She was next seen at 2:30 a.m. at the corner of Osborne Street and Whitechapel Road by Ellen Holland, a lodger in the same house, who, seeing she was very drunk, requested her to return with her to the lodging house. She, however, refused, remarking that she would soon be back, and walked away down the Whitechapel Road in the direction of the place where the body was found. There can be no doubt with regard to the time, because the Whitechapel church clock chimed 2:30, and Holland called the attention of the deceased to the time. We have been unable to find any person who saw her alive after Holland left her. The distance from Osborne Street to Bucks Row would be about half a mile. Inquiries were made in every conceivable quarter with a view to trace the murderer, but not the slightest clue can at present be obtained. In the course of our inquiries amongst the numerous women of the same class as the deceased, it was ascertained that a feeling of terror existed against a man known as Leather Apron, who, it appeared, have for a considerable time past been levying blackmail and ill-using them if his demands were not complied with, although there was no evidence to connect him with the murder. It was, however, thought desirable to find him and interrogate him as to his movements on the night in question, and with that view, searching inquiries were made at all common lodging-houses in various parts of the metropolis. But through the publicity given in the Star and other newspapers, the man was made acquainted with the fact that he was being sought for, and it was not until the 10th instant that he was discovered, when it was found that he had been concealed by his relatives. On his being interrogated, he was able, however, to give such a satisfactory account of his movements as to prove conclusively that the suspicions were groundless. Suspicion was also attached to 3 men employed during the night of the murder by Messrs. Barber & Co., horse slaughterers, Winthorpe Street, which is about 30 yards from where the body was found. They have, however, been seen separately, and lengthy statements taken from them as to how they spent their time during the night, and the explanations given by them were confirmed by the police who saw them at work, and no grounds appear to exist to suspect them of the murders. In the meantime, viz. At 6 a.m., 8th instant, the dead and mutilated body of Annie Chapman was found in the yard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields, having been murdered in the same manner, the mutilations being of the same description, but more brutal, leaving no doubt that the same person committed both murders. The identification in this case has also been clearly established. She was the widow of a coachman named Chapman, who died at Windsor some 18 months since, from whom she had been separated several years previously through her drunken habits, and who, up to the time of his death, made her an allowance of 10 shillings per week. For some years past she has been a frequenter of the common lodging-houses in the neighbourhood of Spitalfields, and for some time previous to her death had resided at 35 Dorset Street, where she was last seen alive at 2 a.m. on the morning of the murder, but not having the money to pay her lodgings, left the house, remarking she would go and get it. At the time she appeared the worse for drink. From then until her body was found, no reliable information can be obtained as to her movements. It was ascertained that for the last 2 years she has occasionally been visited by a man named Edward Stanley, a labourer who resides at 1 Osborne Place, Whitechapel. With that exception, she was not known to be acquainted with any particular man. Stanley has been found and interrogated, and from his statement it has been clearly established that on the night of the 30th ult he was on duty with the 2nd Brigade Southern Division, Hants Militia, at Fort Elson, Gosport, and during the night of the 7th instant he was in bed at his lodging-house from midnight until 7 a.m. 8th, an hour after the body was discovered. He is also believed to be a respectable, hard-working man, and no suspicion whatever is attached to him. The deceased was in the habit of wearing 2 brass rings, a wedding and keeper. These were missing when the body was found, and the finger bore marks of their having been removed by force. Special inquiries have been made at all places where they may be offered for pledge or for sale by a person believing them to be gold, but nothing has resulted therefrom. Searching inquiries were also made at lodging houses, etc., with a view of ascertaining whether any person had been seen to enter with blood on them, with a like result. The inhabitants of the houses adjoining the scenes of the murders have been seen, and many called as witnesses before the coroner, but none of them heard anything to attract their attention on either occasion. No doubt the murders in each case were committed where the bodies were found. Bucks Row is a narrow, quiet thoroughfare frequented by prostitutes for immoral purposes at night, and no doubt the yard of 29 Hanbury Street has been used for a similar purpose. Several persons have been detained at various stations on suspicion, and their movements have been inquired into. Numerous statements have also been made and letters received bearing on the subject, but after the most exhaustive inquiries no useful result has been attained. The inquest has been opened on both bodies and adjourned from time to time. Numerous witnesses have been examined, and both stand now adjourned, that on Mary Ann Nichols until 22nd, and on Annie Chapman until today. Plans have been prepared of the scene of each murder for the information of the coroner, and are herewith admitted for the information of Commissioner. Inquiries have been continued in every direction in which it is thought information may be obtained, and no effort will be spared to elucidate the mysteries. F.G. Abberline, Inspector, John Shaw, Superintendent.
And with that, Abberline set down his pen and headed over to the Working Lads Institute on Whitechapel Road to attend the resumed inquest into the death of Annie Chapman. No doubt hopes were running high that the police investigation would soon yield the desired result, and the perpetrator of the crimes would be brought to justice. What nobody knew then was that these murders were destined to remain unsolved, and over the next few weeks the police would find themselves subjected to a huge amount of criticism from the newspapers. The police's inability to catch the perpetrator would encourage groups of amateur detectives to venture out onto the streets of Whitechapel, whilst countless armchair sleuths were only too willing to add their own opinions and to write to the newspapers and the police, proffering their theories as to the murderer's identity and how he might best be caught. Although he did on the whole remain tight-lipped about his own personal opinions on the case, a by then retired Abberline did give an interview to Castle's Saturday Journal in May 1892, in which he made plain his exasperation about what had then become the most infamous case of his career. "Theories?" he exclaimed when conversing about the murders. "We were lost almost in theories. There were so many of them." I wonder what Abberline would make of the comments section on YouTube. Just asking for a friend.